Hello, everybody. We're going to get started, and welcome to the NAAEE Virtual Conference for 2017. My name is Judy Browse, and I'm the Executive Director of NAAEE. I'm going to stop sharing my video so I can save bandwidth for our panelists, and so happy you could all join us. Today, we've got really a special treat because we have some amazing funders that are on this panel to talk about that. As many of you know, we should have been in Puerto Rico this week, and unfortunately, Hurricane Maria had other plans for us. But it is great that we've had this opportunity to present a few of the sessions that would have taken place during the conference. And in the past few days, we have had 4 great sessions so far, and I know this one will be another fantastic one as well. There's so much interest in hearing from the funding community. And just wanted to let you all know that all of these sessions are recorded and will be posted on YouTube. And we know that a number of you will listen to them afterward and share them with your colleagues. So today's session is all about growing and supporting the movement. We're going to hear from 5 different funders, and really excited to have this particular group together to talk about what they're thinking, what makes sense in their minds in terms of funding and supporting the field, and what that means to all of you who are listening. Since this is a fundraising panel, I thought I'd give you an update on our fundraising campaign. As many of you know, when the conference was canceled, we launched a fundraising campaign to help our wonderful partners in Puerto Rico. It's the Together for Puerto Rico Fund, and this is all supporting 100% of the donations go to Para la Naturaleza, which is an amazing group doing work across the island, focused on conservation and education. And of course, they're normally facing challenges, and now they're facing, like the entire island, some really, really big challenges. So the island is still in desperate need of water and other supplies, and we've listed those on the website. Para la Naturaleza now can help disseminate those supplies, and things are getting to the point where hopefully we can just keep sending the things that are most needed to the island, including money and the important supplies. And we are very excited to have Alexandra here from Puerto Rico, who will give us an update in a minute. So what we'd like to do in this session is I'll give a very quick little mini session on Zoom so that everybody knows how to answer questions throughout the presentation. And then a quick update on the virtual conference itself and how you can upload your sessions. And then I'll introduce Kara, who will take it away. At the end, we'll have another chance for question and answers, and then a few closing thoughts. So if you've never used Zoom, it's very easy. If you look at your toolbar at the bottom, you'll see that there's a chat. That's where you can ask questions to all the panelists, to one individual panelist, or to everyone. And we will be monitoring those questions and feeding them into Kara. So feel free to ask questions anytime throughout the presentation. But again, we'll leave time at the end for additional questions if you have them. And I know Kara has a number of questions for the entire panel. For those of you who were going to present in Puerto Rico, we would encourage you to upload your presentations to our virtual site so that we can have a record of the 2017 conference. There were more than 350 presentations and posters that were going to take place, and it's very easy. You just go to NAAEE.org/conference/virtual, and you'll see the directions. It'll take you right to your profile, and it's already inputted. So you just click on your presentation, and you can do and upload the relevant information. So we hope you all do that so we have a record. And of course, email Mary if you have any questions about that. You can also download the program from both the regular conference and the research symposium to get the names and what people were doing. And then when you upload your sessions, it will all be tagged and you'll be able to find whatever you need to find. Lots and lots of good ideas were going to take place at the conference, and we'll try and capture them in this virtual program. And during this presentation, if you have any technical problems, please email Kristen and Cy, who are at the controls and can help you do whatever you need. They're not just technology pros, they're actually pros in environmental education, communications, and everything else, but they will help us with all of the technical aspects. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's session, Kara Jitsi. Kara's been a longtime friend of NAAEE and a wonderful supporter of environmental education, e-STEM work, innovative education, as well as thinking about how to best engage young people using technology, youth empowerment, and action-oriented education initiatives. She joined Underwriters Laboratories as the Director of Public Safety and Education and Outreach in 2012, and in that role, she worked with her teams to extend the reach of existing programming, such as the UL Safety Program, by focusing on using innovative technologies and strategies that empower young people. She has also had great success in expanding key partnerships to deliver content to broad audiences through the development of new and engaging STEM programs, such as the UL Innovative Education Awards, which we've been so lucky to work with you on, e-learning programs, and family science nights. Kara is currently now the Vice President of Education and Outreach, where she continues to lead the not-for-profit side of UL and handle all education initiatives throughout the company. She oversees the youth education team as responsible for ensuring that her team and partners have access to innovative education tools, practices, and methods. She and her team also look at effective practices in education throughout the country and the world, looking at industry trends and metrics to allow UL to better understand the impact of their education programs and their efficacy. Kara is also working to develop an international education and outreach strategy to reach a wider audience around the world with high quality education. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Kara, and let's give her a warm virtual welcome. Thank you, Kara, for being here today.
Thank you, Judy. And thanks for that intro. I'm really excited today, guys. We have so many incredible leaders in the field ready to tell about themselves and their roles. And I know we have some very active listeners out there, so I want to get started right away. Really thrilled to be here. And as Judy mentioned, don't hesitate to ask your questions throughout. We want this to be as engaging as possible. But let's get started. I'll give a brief introduction for each of our wonderful panelists, and I'll let them tell much more about their roles and their organizations. So why don't we start there? We are very lucky to have Alexandra Hertel from Puerto Rico. She's the Executive Director of Ciara Borman Foundation. We have Jason Morris, Senior Program Officer at the Pisces Foundation, focused on environmental education. We have Louisa Koch, who's the Director of Education at NOAA. And we have Nancy Bales, Executive Director of the Gray Family Foundation. So I'm going to turn it over to Alexandra to get started and tell everyone a little more about her role, about her organization, certainly give us an update of how things are going for her, as we all know the crisis down there. And we'll get started with that and then on to Jason from there.
Hello, thank you for having me. The Ciara Borman Foundation is a small family foundation. Our focus is a little different than the other founders in the sense that we recently began to get into environmental education. We mostly focused before on alternative education. So 6 months ago, we were focusing more our efforts on environmental education, and specifically with the problems here of illegal landfills and littering in the nature, in the rivers, in the ocean, in the countryside. Obviously, our focus has drastically changed in the last month. So the big proposal we had, which was an environmental educational campaign on anti-littering, now is temporarily on hold. And our efforts are focusing on different issues that have now come up and opportunities within the catastrophe. For example, education about solar energy. For the first time, this is a normal conversation, and people are actually trying to take these small communities, and they themselves are asking for all this information that before it was like a radical thought. Now it's, oh, this is actually what we should be doing. And that's just a little bit of, I guess, changes that are going on right now.
Thank you, Alexandra. I know we're all thinking of you, and you know, I'm thrilled that the fund is set up, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions
Yeah.
on the call. Thank you. Jason, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, everyone. I'm Jason Morris, and as Kara mentioned, I'm from the Pisces Foundation. And at the Pisces Foundation, we believe that if we act now and we act boldly, we can quickly accelerate to a world where people and nature thrive together. We're supporting innovators who knows what it takes and doing really what's necessary to ensure abundant water, a safe climate, and that our kids have the environmental know-how that they need to create a sustainable world. So for environmental education, the program that I lead, when it comes to getting those kids the environmental know-how that they need, we think that it can happen anywhere that learning occurs. It occurs in schools, it occurs out of schools, it occurs in canoes, and everywhere in between. And we're really excited to have this as a formal part of our foundation. We're a relatively new foundation at 5 years into it now, and environmental education has been a mainstay the whole way. So it's great to be here with all of you today, and really look forward to this conversation.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Louisa, you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm Louisa Koch. I'm the Director of Education for NOAA. NOAA is a science-based environmental agency. Our role is to take the pulse of the planet and then use that information to make informed decisions. We collect a tremendous amount of data and models and tools and support informed decision making. That means people are making informed decisions with our information. As we've seen over the last couple of months, there are a lot of natural disasters that are coming to communities, and good data and information doesn't make resilient communities, people do. And so education is our strategy, one of our strategies for giving people the tools that they need to become more resilient through natural disasters and to better manage natural resources.
Excellent. Thank you. And we'll go to Nancy from here, last but certainly not least.
Thanks, Kara. Hi, I'm Nancy Bales with Gray Family Foundation, and we're located in Oregon. We do our funding in Oregon. Our goals are really around how to keep people connected to and knowledgeable about what keeps communities happy, and we believe are healthy. And we believe that environmental education and helping children develop those connections to the land that they live and learn how to be community stewards is a really important component of that. So we work to get kids outside, help them understand the natural systems that help sustain us.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, this is great. Thank you guys for the introductions. We're going to get started. I mean, as all of you look, your organizations have multiple priorities, and we understand that. But if you could give everybody a little bit of an understanding on why environmental education is so key right now for your organization, and you know, how do you prioritize that as you're looking for funding opportunities? And Nancy, do you want to get started?
Sure. I mean, and you know, plays off what I just said. We really understand and believe that having people develop that connection to where they live and understand the consequences and the actions or the inaction, you know, of something is what helps build those strong communities. So our commitment to environmental education in some ways is around civic engagement, how we get people educated, engaged, and empowered to stand up and take action. You know, we understand that engaging kids from a very early age is important, and our focus is on middle school students at that critical time when there's a lot going on in their lives, and getting them outdoors to connect with education in a different way and have those hands-on opportunities.
That's great. Thank you. And Louisa?
So education is a critical investment for us, and we're focused on K-12. We're focused on informal learning processes, and we're also focused on supporting students, particularly in higher ed. So we have a broad range of engagements. We have a lot of natural connection with people through the National Weather Service, for example, because people depend on us to know how to live their daily lives as well as how to make their longer term decisions. And so we have a lot of different ways of reaching people, and we try and take advantage of those connections to leave them better educated and more capable of using information as they go through their lives.
That's great. Jason, you want to pick up from here? How do you guys look at your priorities and focus on environmental education as you're evaluating different programs that are possible funding opportunities?
Yeah, well, you know, among the three programs that we have, water, climate, and environmental education, we really see that if we're going to advance to the world where people and nature are thriving together, that it's not only a short-term proposition, that we have to take multiple strategies, and some of them are to fix and alleviate some of the environmental problems that are happening today. And then our work specifically through the environmental education program focuses on, you know, really building that next generation of leaders and critical thinkers to tackle the problems that we don't even know about today, as well as those that still may be hanging around when they rise up. So we really see that environmental education has you know, immediate benefits in the academic realm and health and wellness. It also has really long-term benefits where kids can learn how to communicate better, build their leadership skills for their career and their life in the future, and ultimately become stewards of the environment over time. And we recognize that that doesn't happen just once. That one environmental education program for a fourth grader for an afternoon canoeing on the bay, you know, is just not going to get it done ultimately. That we really need to think about the whole system that we're working towards, and what happens in early childhood, and what happens in elementary, and what happens in the summers and after school. And as you get into middle school, like Nancy was saying, in Oregon, and you get a week of outdoor school, you know, what comes next? So we're really trying to look at the entire system and build a pipeline so kids can have experiences, multiple experiences over time, to really help shape them and grow into the people who they want to be and the leaders that they want to be with the best education they can have along the way.
That's great. Yeah, interesting how important the entire ecosystem is from early on all the way through. Really interesting. Now, Alexandra, I know things have changed so drastically for you, but as you guys look at your priorities, and you know, I'm sure it's a very different answer today than it was a few months ago, but how do you look at prioritizing and your focus in the funding that you look to serve for your community?
Well, right now, obviously, there's a lot of immediate relief. But what's really important is the medium and long term. Because if you just focus on the immediate relief, you're forgetting and you're keeping these populations vulnerable for this to happen again. So right now, in terms of, we're focusing a lot in terms of education of solar. You know, these small communities, our electrical grid is a mess. So for the first time, there's an interest in education about how to manage different things, solar refrigerators, solar panels, and our focus before was trying to be on prevention, which is why the education is the most important aspect of everything, because otherwise you just do a beach cleanup or whatever, you're putting a Band-Aid on a problem. Mm-hmm. The most important thing is to educate from kinder to high school specifically. But yes, now the focus is definitely different. We're also trying to focus on basically the ocean, because it's become our landfill now. You know, everything my English gets stuck sometimes. The golpes de agua, you know, the intense city of all the trash that's going out through the rivers. and what you can see doesn't exist. So we want to do some underwater photography of what is going on under the ocean to then help demonstrate how important this issue is. Also take the opportunity within this catastrophe. Right now, all the illegal landfills, you can actually see them. You can do an aerial GIS and you can map them and then try to deal with this issue and have nothing is more important than images. You know, these images help so much with the education here that it's lacking. There's not a focus on environmental education except for Para Naturaleza, which is an amazing job. But here, there's so many other needs that obviously it gets relegated to the back, but it's just as important.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, you know, similar to what Jason was saying, that there is such an immediate need right now, but you can't lose track of the.
You can't lose track, no.
Now, back to your mention on solar, just to clarify, when you say a huge opportunity to educate, are you talking about just to citizens or to children or to on more of a commercial
No,
side?
communities, for the first time, communities are reaching out to us, asking us for information on how they can get off the grid at least to some percent.
Interesting. Okay.
So communities that before this would have been a far-fetched idea, now this is a common thought here. Everyone is very interested in learning more about how we can do micro solar grids in different communities that don't want to be this vulnerable. Mm-hmm. For example, Casa Pueblo is working this already in Adjuntas, which is a community that was hit. I mean, we were all hit badly, but some worse than others. Their main problem is really that they have no electricity. Mm-hmm. The problem is it has come after the hurricane, not during the hurricane. I mean, you know, people on dialysis, diabetics. I mean, the people that are dying every day is not because during the hurricane, it's the aftermath. Mm-hmm. It's the dependence on this huge grid that just failed all of us. Mm-hmm. So now there's a lot of need and concern about how to become solar, but it's coming from the communities, from the children, from parents. The dynamic between children and adults is very interesting because sometimes the adults can be a little more hard to see things a different way, and you see the dialogue between children and their parents and how children are opening their parents' eyes. And this is why education, environmental education, is so important, especially with this young generation. It creates a change in the whole family dynamics, the community. It's just, I think it's key, really.
It really is. It starts the dialogue, and it's amazing how influential children can be. Now, we have a question here specifically for you, Alexandra, asking if you already had organizations in place to respond to this sudden interest, and are you having to help with that education as well as the funding?
Yes and yes. I mean, there weren't organizations focused on this, so now we are having to teach ourselves. There are two organizations that are really informing themselves a lot, which is Casa Pueblo en Adjuntas and Enlace in El Caño Martín Peña. The communities are very vocal about becoming more solar. Mm-hmm. And I met yesterday with the executive director of Casa Pueblo to focus exactly on having all this information in one place and different alternatives for communities depending on their size. So anyone who is interested can start getting informed. This is new to us. Excellent. So we all in a learning process so that we can disseminate further on this information.
Okay, that's really interesting, and maybe you and I should connect after the call because we have a lot of expertise in solar panels, so maybe we could help you.
That's great.
I want to switch to another topic that's so important in the funding conversation as we talk about outcomes. How does your organizations, how do you guys approach looking at outcomes and really specifically metrics and impact. And, you know, we all talk about impact and have different definitions. But I think this audience would be very interested to know how you in your organization look at outcomes and impact, and how does that have a role in your funding decisions. Louisa, would you want to get started, and then I'll let everybody chime in?
Sure. So NOAA as an agency has some, I think, amazing metrics that sort of set the tone for the agency. It's things like increasing the accuracy and lead time for forecasts of severe weather, like hurricanes and tornadoes. We have innovative forecasts like air quality and harmful algal blooms, and new forecasts like runoff risk to help farmers figure out when to fertilize their crops so that they have the minimum amount of runoff into the streams and rivers. And we do these a lot in partnerships. And so education, it works to underpin those big, very solid metrics. In the education community, we also have learning really as a metric. We want to be a learning community, and we focus on qualitative and quantitative metrics because education can be hard to capture in the same way as the landfall of a hurricane. And so we spend a lot of time on storytelling and working hard to figure out how to tell stories about the importance of what we do and why we do it. By being a learning community, we use evaluation a lot, and we look at the results of our evaluation and use that to try and improve the way that we do our work. When we collect data, for example, on our student programs, and we look at diversity is very important to us, and we're tracking our pipeline and looking at where diverse students are coming into our pipeline and where they're falling out of our pipeline, and that's really helping us improve our programs. So we do have quantitative metrics like the number of educators who are integrating NOAA-related information into their programs, and as a precursor to that, the number of teachers who say they're interested and the number that plan to, followed up by the number who's actually do. So that gets us more towards outcome measures, and we require evaluation from all of our grantees in order to keep collecting this information and figuring out how to piece it together to tell the bigger story.
Really good. Yeah, it's a balancing act between the different type of qualitative versus quantitative. And Nancy, how would you look at your outcomes and impact in some of your funding decisions?
Yeah, you know, actually very similar to Louisa. I don't, and you know, the only thing that I would add, I would say that, you know, it's very much about that learning community, impact in, you know, just looking at the numbers of people that we're reaching and the number of times that kids are able to have those experiences, because we know that building is really important. The only thing that maybe I would add beyond what Louisa said for their program is we are starting to look really specifically at, can we get the field of EE to begin to better reflect the diverse communities of our state? And how do we do that? How do we make sure that we're representing and engaging all Oregonians in these programs, and that students are starting to see themselves reflected in the educators that they're seeing, so they're have experiences with people who bring the same cultural priorities or ideas to this field. And so that's kind of a, you know, something that we've been thinking more and more about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so important that they can really connect with their educators, and I think it's such a deep experience that way. And Jason, for you guys, how would you answer the outcomes and impact question, which is so critical to the funding that we all do?
Yeah, thank you. And similar to what Nancy and Louisa have said in terms of both qualitative and quantitative. But one of the things that we're really focused on, in addition to our own outcomes of interest, the Pisces Foundation is a conservation foundation at its root. And so fundamentally down the line, we're seeking kind of those long-term conservation outcomes. But we know that there are penultimate outcomes in the intermediate stage that have to occur in order to get to that long-term conservation outcome. So we look at education outcomes, health and wellness outcomes, youth development outcomes, and to Nancy's point, making sure that there's a social equity approach to all of the work that we do, fundamentally leading to conservation. As we fund at the systems level almost exclusively, we very rarely are counting children that are going through programs, and we're trying to measure the effectiveness of the networks and alliances and systems that we're operating in. And that's often a more complicated, longer term experience. And so we know, for example, how many members a given organization has, or how many people attend certain webinars. But what we're seeking really is what is happening with the knowledge that's being disseminated in those networks and at those conferences and on those webinars. And what are happening if there's, 75 people on today's webinar, what are their takeaways? And how does that improve their work and therefore improve the field? And so similarly with measurement and evaluation, we really want to help build a culture of evaluation within the field with our funding and help pivot the purpose of those evaluations from satisfying funder requirements to improving the delivery and design of environmental education programs on the field. And one of the ways that we think we can be helpful is to fund efforts that are looking at what are the main common outcomes for environmental education programs across the country, and what frameworks exist to measure those, and what tools can actually be employed on the ground. And so we're funding a couple of collaborative efforts, one in Colorado and one a little bit in Oregon with Nancy and her team, to really look at what are the common things that organizations are trying to achieve in their state or in their region, and someday nationally, and how can the whole of those experiences be rolled up, and so we can have kind of big data pushing environmental education forward as opposed to being criticized for the lack of data. We know that it's happening every day in communities in every state across the country, and yet we don't have many mechanisms to pull it together and to look at the global academic gains that are being made and the global health and wellness gains that are being made. And we'd like to figure out how to think about that. We know it's complicated and long-term, but what we've learned in talking to some of our grantees is that there's been a lot of progress, and groups in regionally and locally and nationally have had these conversations. We're seeking to codify them, help codify them, get them available through NAAEE's website and others, and really help fuel the data that's coming in from programs to improve those programs, and also tell a better story, as Louisa mentioned on the storytelling side, tell a better story to the world that we live in about how important this work is and how effective it is, and how you can't limit it to one sector or another. It's not only science work or only math work or only social studies work. It's all of the above, and how can we really capture that in all of its essence and tell that compelling story?
Absolutely. You hit on so many important points there. And even for us at UL, Judy had mentioned we've been managing the UL Innovative Education Award, where we showcase and highlight some incredible work being done across North America. And we're in a similar position where we're really looking to do a better job of evaluating the impact, because the work is tremendous. And we're trying to look beyond the individual programs, which are so strong in itself, but look at what are we learning, their framework, their models, and how we can tell the better story to help continue to elevate their work. And I don't know if anyone's on on the phone as one of our award winners, but there's a great story to be told. And so we're also going through that process of evaluation. It's so key to have the evaluation set in a structure to work off of. So I know we look at it in a very similar way. Alexandra, I don't want to leave you out on this one as we look at impact. And again, I know there's immediate impact for you, but if you want to, give everyone your thoughts on how you guys look at this idea of outcomes, impact, and maybe touch on the storytelling part too, because that is so key.
Well, we have the same issues with qualitative and quantitative, and actually in Puerto Rico, many of our organizations are really underfunded, so it's part of our job is to help them in that part of being able to tell the story, to evaluate, and get organizations together. There's some are doing a very good job assessing pre and post their programs, and being able to unite organizations that have a strong aspect of evaluation with those that don't, so they can help each other out. Because the more information you have in terms of evaluation, the more you can get other people to join your project in terms of funding. And that's something that's been a little hard here because there isn't that much emphasis on evaluation in terms of the organization's point of view. In terms of telling the story, now it's that's basically what we're focusing on. We were actually focusing on telling the story in a very different way beforehand, but
yeah,
right
now, very different. Alexandra, while I have you, and I apologize, I'm a little behind on the questions, guys. I'm doing the best I can, but we actually had a question for you related to what you guys are going through and talking about storytelling in Puerto Rico. And have you considered the connection to what Cuba has faced in the past, and wondering if there is a connection there on what's been done there. The question is anyone looking at correlations between the hurricane aftermath in Puerto Rico and the challenges Cuba faced after the oil embargo, when communities realized that sustainability meant establishing local agriculture cooperatives and adopting bicycles as primary modes of transportation?
This was actually a conversation that was going on before the hurricane with the local agricultural cooperatives, not with the bicycles. We're still far away from that. People really depend on their cars here way too much. And there's about public transportation options. But in terms of the local agricultural cooperatives, this conversation was already being had, and actually many people here were visiting Cuba and going to different places and taking their knowledge and bringing it back. So this had maybe been going on for the past 5 years, but now for the first time we actually have funding after the hurricane. People are understanding how important it is to have a sustentabilidad alimenticia. Okay, it's not coming out in English. So people for the first time are understanding how important it is. I mean, we import 80% of our food.
Yeah.
And here, the small percentage that there was of agricultural farmers lost 80% of their crops.
Yeah.
I think coffee was almost 95%. Yeah. So yes, this conversation was already going on, but now funders are interested in supporting these agricultural cooperatives where there was not an interest before. I think we were one of the few foundations that actually were helping these different organizations. And now they're now when they most need it, there's again a chance within the catastrophe to change these paradigms that were not functional. We should not be importing 80% of our food. Yeah. So now there's an opportunity within the catastrophe because we are receiving funding that has never been received before in terms of these things, in terms of agricultural, agroecological agriculture. So yes, there's definitely an opportunity, but this discussion was being had before. Now it's just in the forefront.
A lot of opportunities that like you said, weren't recognized.
Yeah.
Much. I'm going to go to another question for all the panelists. So whoever would like to speak first. Environmental educators often work seasonally with low wages and benefits. Opportunities for advancement can be few and far between. How do we go about creating diversity and inclusiveness in educators when the ability to hold such positions in a long-term fashion is somewhat dependent on coming from a privileged background? Anybody wanted to take that one? I know, Jason, you had talked, actually you all have talked about the importance of diversity in hiring. It's a really good question because there are so many part-time and seasonal jobs. Any bright spots out there of examples of organizations that have been able to do this well?
Yeah, there are a couple of bright spots, but it's the 800-pound issue in the field, and in that for the most part, the field is populated by relatively small, very local organizations, and so the pipeline, even if it was full, is not that big of a pipeline. And so one of the things that we're looking at is how to connect the pipelines of fellowship programs and some of the career development programs from a horizontal standpoint to help make the pools bigger. One of the statistical certainties about hiring and including and hiring diverse candidates is that the larger the pools are, the likely the possibility or the certainty of hiring a diverse candidate. And if the pools are only 2 or 3 people big in each organization, it makes it harder to get through that. So one of the things we're looking at are those kind of the cross strategies to look at trying to make the pools bigger. Some of the bright spots exist where organizations and formal school systems have come together to make environmental education more of a mainstream activity and less on the margins. And when it's bigger, broader, and taken more seriously, the jobs tend to be less seasonal, better paid, and have benefits, and therefore are accessible to a much broader range of folks throughout the country. But again, those are the exceptions, not the rules. Some organizations, I know, like in Maryland, where there's a graduation requirement, some of the organizations there are requiring teaching credentials to be an environmental educator and the associated benefits that come along with it. That's helpful in some way, and it's also another credential and another thing to do in another way that costs money to get. So as the field is trying to professionalize on one side and ensure diversity at the same time, sometimes these things come into conflict. I think we have to look really closely at those points of intersection to determine if the decision to professionalize on one branch of the tree is at odds with our decision to be inclusive and accessible on another one. It's a really tough issue that I'm thrilled that so many people are thinking about, but there's not a ton of widespread answers right now.
Yeah.
I might just add, I just spent the last couple of days at an outdoor recreation summit, and it was interesting that issue is the same issue that came up at the outdoor recreation. So I think that there's potentially partners in this conversation about how do we create more value for these jobs. And a lot of what the outdoor recreation industry is talking about is the economic impact of that work. And I think that was one of the, when we went for funding for outdoor education here in Oregon, one of the things we looked at and one of the stories we told was about the economic impact of having these teachers. And I think especially in the teaching community, we often undervalue having these people employed in communities all across the state. it's a real value to have those kind of people in the communities and to have that kind of employment. And we often undervalue that in the big story that we tell about environmental education. So some of it is switching that narrative. I'm glad the conversation is happening about this because I think it's really important.
Really important. Absolutely. Louisa?
Yeah, so I think Nancy and Jason, said it well. We do have a strong focus on experiential learning throughout the year. Obviously, it's easiest to get out in the summer, but since we have a strong focus on academic learning, and that's in the classroom, then we face the conflict that Jason was talking about of requiring those additional credentials for the in-school learning time. So it's definitely an issue.
Mm-hmm. And Alexandra, any thoughts to this on how you balance and the seasonal and part-time versus the ability to provide more stability?
Yes, well, we don't have the seasonal aspect in terms of environmental education. It's always summer here, and there's always outdoor activities. With public education, we work a lot with agriculture, having urban farms within the schools. Of course, and at the same, like you just have this all year round, so we don't have the seasonal aspect. We do have the part-time aspect, which is a big problem. And yes, it's true. We're trying to do different things. For example, what we try to do is when we see people that have part-time jobs in one program, try to match them with another one. Mm-hmm. But it's difficult. It's definitely definitely a problem to give stability to these people that love their jobs, but at the same time they have to take care of the families, and especially now a lot of people obviously have lost their jobs. Mm-hmm. Or their jobs have been their time has been cut in half. Schools are finally starting to open. And so we face the challenge in a different way now because we had it before. But now resources are limited, programs are closing. It's something that we definitely have to focus on as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it is. I'm sure it's so different for you. Let's switch a little bit and get into the nitty gritty of probably what a lot of people want to hear from you guys. And let's talk about, as you evaluate different proposals that come in and you look to prioritize, I'm going to do a kind of a two-part question here. What are you specifically looking for when you have these projects come in? And another question to add to that is, I know a lot of funders do not accept unsolicited proposals, but what's your advice for folks out there that really want to get in touch with you or others and kind of following protocol, but finding a way to break through on the funding perspective? So I guess I'll kind of ask you to answer that both ways, and whoever wants to start, jump in.
Well, I can start. I will say, first of all, we've really been looking at how do we make ourselves as available as possible to our grantees or to those who are thinking about coming to the foundation. And our program officers now set up office hours, so she's available all the time. And we encourage people out there to call and ask questions and talk to us about it. And we've been trying to set up more webinars before granting applications go out so that people have as much information as possible. I think I used to be on the other side, and raising money for a nonprofit is probably many of us have been in that position as well. And I think one of the biggest disservices foundations used to do to me in that position, I felt like, was not saying no. When, like we'd have conversations about the project and they would keep the conversations going because they didn't want to tell us, no, this wasn't a fit. And I think as foundations, we have an obligation to try to find those programs that fit best with what we're trying to accomplish, but then also be upfront when it doesn't. and work with organizations, especially small ones that are trying to figure out how to do this work and how to try to get funding. We, in our new, we've sort of started rethinking a lot of our application process, and one of the things that we're trying to do is instead of looking at like specific numbers and things like that as indicators of the projects that we want to fund, we're looking more at what are the partnerships that these organizations, especially as we're trying to reach these marginalized communities, what are the partnerships and how are those partnerships being developed with other organizations? Because that, I think, is one of the great ways to have impact. So I'll leave it at that.
So great. Who wants to jump in here? Louisa?
Jason unmiked, but I'm happy to. I agree with Nancy that, the best approach is conversation. And it's, we try and make ourselves accessible by phone, by email and meetings so that people can have that conversation, because that's how we learn a lot from hearing what people are interested in. And we're always wanting to make connections between people that are looking to make a connection with us. And we have so many, we're a multi-armed octopus. And so it's really hard to know all the pieces of our organization. And we try and not just promote our organization, but to make this throughout the community, because we really want to be beneficial to the community at large. In terms of our grant announcements, they tend to be pretty focused. And so, for example, right now, our environmental literacy program has a focus on resilience. And we don't just want to focus on resilience, we want to understand what the role of education is in resilience, because that's what we're about. And we're really focused not just on sort of theoretically mapping that out, but understanding what communities are doing in planning for resilience, because when a hurricane's coming, that's not the time to prepare. You really need to, it's really long-term work, to rethink your power grid. I mean, what Alexandra is talking about in terms of solar, I mean, what would it mean for Puerto Rico to redefine its grid as a largely solar-driven grid? I mean, that's just so daunting. And, I know Elon Musk is shipping batteries to Puerto Rico as we speak. But that's an enormous transition for the community to make. So we're looking at communities that are doing that hard work of resilience planning, because that's the part of the conversation we want to get in on, and then figuring out what role does education play, because we're obviously not going to be the resilience planners. So by the time we get to the announcement, I think a lot of people recognize they have the answer to Nancy's question, that really this is really not for them, because you have to be pretty well positioned for the specific thing we're looking for. In our BWEC grants, it's broader, but it's still very focused on meaningful watershed education experiences, because that's where we bring strength to the conversation, and that's where we're really trying to build the community around something that's very focused, because we've found that you can do a million acts of random acts of education or conservation, but if you want to accrue value, you need to have those different points adding to each other and having the whole be greater than the individual part.
Absolutely.
All yours, Jason.
It's great to follow that. That's one of my favorite phrases, the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. And Pisces really is calibrated in that way, in that the change that we're seeking to advance through our grantees is at the systems level. And so on one side of our grant making, we focus on the kind of the quality and quantity of environmental education writ large, and on the other side, we focus on the field and the infrastructure or lack thereof that supports it. And so it turns out, more than 90% of the philanthropy that supports this field goes directly to programs, and that's incredibly important. And we felt like if we were to spread our funding annually across all of the programs in the country, we would, incrementally help improve that along the way, but our trustees really wanted to have a national impact and move the program kind of more into the mainstream. And so we rarely, if ever, fund any one program. We're funding alliances and networks and training, field-wide training programs, some research agendas like I talked about around common measures and those kinds of things. And so we're looking for projects that have relevance nationally. And what we know is that every program is a model. The thousands and thousands of them across the country, they're all models. But which ones are active in that process of sharing that model and spreading that model in a research-based way to ensure that high leverage scales are being achieved? Is there a way to make something relevant locally in one community and also nationally across the country? And we found that at the programmatic level, rarely, if ever, does that occur. But at the systems level, that occurs a lot. Organizations like NAAEE that we're on this webinar with, really focuses on strengthening the field through the trainings and the programs and the research agendas and the active web communities that are going on, and all of that provides a platform for everyone out there working in relative isolation in their individual place to be a part of a community and not have to rethink of, what are the 5 steps that it takes to build a garden in my schoolyard? And is there curriculum out there that could be helpful once the garden is built? Or do we have to do all of those things from scratch every single time? And generally, we heard before we started grant making from the interviewees out there in the country that they're tired of being isolated in this work and would like to be networked better, be connected better, to learn from one another, and to take what works in one place and help it work in another, recognizing that standardization and homogenization is not a good thing, but some standardization without homogenization could be a good thing as you approach it across the country. And so what works in Maryland doesn't always work in Oregon, but there are elements of what happened in Maryland to create a graduation requirement that Nancy and her team in Oregon picked up and repackaged in a different way so that it made it so every 5th and 6th grader has a week at outdoor school. Those are very different leverage points, but both of them get to the every child will have environmental education in their state. And so it's not about the activities being the same along the way. It's about the goal and the destination for the Pisces Foundation that all children will have these experiences over time. And so what we're looking for in proposals and the answer to those questions. How will this effort make it so dramatically more, if not all, children will have these experiences in all places, not just in places that have traditionally had these had the environmental education programs in their communities, in their forests, and their lakes, and along their seashores. But what about communities that don't have as much access to this work? How can we make sure that that's happening too? So we don't accept proposals unsolicited, but I can tell you from the size of my email inbox, we do accept emails. And to Louisa's point, having a conversation is the first way to start that, and carrying it forward from there.
Mm-hmm. And do you have, anything in particular, if there's a program out there that is working at the local level, so many of them are, and to your point about, how can it scale? What is an example of a program that maybe started locally, but the model really worked really well over time? And I don't want to put any of you on the spot, but if you had one to share, I think it would be really helpful with everyone. Because I do think there's an intimidation when you're working in smaller communities or on a local program, but there could be a framework there that has incredible potential to scale. So any thoughts on that?
So I'll talk about the work with our Bay Watershed Education and Training, or BWET program in Maryland. We started there working with environmental organizations and working with teachers that were interested in getting their kids outside and having these meaningful watershed education experiences. And over time, we've built up best practices. We've shared them across schools. We started working with schools, not just teachers, but whole schools, and then counties or multiple schools within a county. And one of the grants that we have out now, and we worked with a lot of partners, and we were part of a collaborative effort in Maryland to get that requirement that every student graduate environmentally literate, which is a work in progress. Getting a law passed, as everyone knows, is not success. Maybe in Nancy's case, but with Oregon Outdoors, but maybe not. You know, we now have a grant out to the Sultana Education Foundation. They're working with 3 counties to do systemic implementation, getting all 5th graders out and getting their teachers trained and also out to look at the Choptank River. And the reason the Choptank River makes a lot of sense right now is because NOAA, again, with many, many partners, has identified the Choptank as one where we can do restorations and significantly improve the working of that ecosystem. So we can take that ecosystem up a notch in terms of how it functions. And we're getting the kids involved in monitoring that ecosystem as we work to improve it. And so it's a systemic experience for the kids, for the 5th graders in the county, which means it's reaching a lot of the kids that would not necessarily have that opportunity. And we're doing it at a time where that experience can really give hope to people. And giving children hope that the environment can get better is a really important thing to do right now.
Yeah, it absolutely is. There is no doubt about it. Well, I have one last question for you guys, but I want to make sure we give all participants a chance. If you have any questions, let us know. Type in the questions. We have about 10 minutes left in this, and so I just want to kind of give a time check. There's so much more to talk about, I know, but don't hesitate if you do have a question for the panelists. But one of the last questions I want to go with, we have a few more, but let's see the time we have. As you guys look across the field in general, or particular programs, what's most exciting that you see happening? There's a lot of things that you know, maybe can be quite depressing these days in the news, and we won't spend time going through all of them. But what are you seeing that's really exciting in the field? And as you're looking to evaluate new programs, you know, what's catching your eye? Where are the bright spots, and where do you hope we go in the next few years?
Well, I'll jump in. This is Jason, and I guess the first thing that I'll say is at the end of my comments, I'm going to jump off the webinar to get somewhere else. So thank you all so much for having me today. But you know, there are many bright spots, and one of them is that more and more schools, more and more communities, more and more states are tapping into the benefits, the multiple benefits that can come from environmental education. Very few of them are calling it environmental education, and I could care less about that. But when you know environmental education, when you see it, and it's happening in more places, more systemically, in more classrooms, in more parks, you know, in more museums, in more zoos than ever before. And that's really exciting to me. It's really encouraging to me that states and towns where I didn't think anything was going on actually has a lot of stuff going on. It just often is happening kind of behind the curtains. And so one of the things, you know, we're focused on is how do we lift that up? How do we raise that up in a way that, to Louisa's point, the whole can be more than the sum of the parts, and the country can start to see that this is a critical component of education, not a nice to have component of education. Because we know that, you know, in the last couple of months, we've seen more than 10 major hurricanes pummel through the world in different places. We've seen ash fall in cities like Vancouver and Seattle and Portland and San Francisco and Los Angeles. On the West Coast, we have these major fires going on. We had a massive earthquake in Mexico, and whatever's next, and all of the things that I didn't mention. And if we think about these things only when something bad like that happens, and that's the time that it galvanizes the public opinion, I don't think we're going to get it done. And so, you know, to the point that our colleague from Puerto Rico is making, that the fact that these conversations were ongoing, and then something like this happens, and there's a community with the know-how, you know, we like to use that word, the know-how to actually rebuild in a different way and rethink in a different way, and replug into the grid in a different way, you know, we'll have a chance. If we only start to do that whenever the floods or fires or storms come along, and then we say, oh, we should rebuild differently, and then everything goes back, you know, the same way that it always has, you know, I think it's going to be a difficult proposition. And so we really believe that for those kids to have the environmental know-how in a rapidly changing world, what we're going to see is we're going to see smarter decisions. We're going to see stronger communities. We're going to see daily actions that help the kids. And in turn, those daily actions are helping our planet as a whole. So thank you all for having me today, and for my esteemed colleagues on the panel. It was really great being with you all, and look forward to seeing you next year in Spokane instead of this week in Puerto Rico.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks so much. I know you have to jump off a few minutes early. Thanks for your input today. It's been fun. Nancy, do you want to pick up, and then Alexandra?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things that that give me a lot of hope, and I'm really excited about. And I think the success that we had here in Oregon with Outdoor School for All, and getting funding and having such broad statewide support for the measure, from the most rural areas of the state to the most urban, really I think is a great signal that this is core in many people's values, and a lot of it is how we talk about this work. And I think that it is an opportunity to really bridge that urban-rural divide that we have in many states, talking about this kind of work, and it's so important to all of us, you know, as we see in Puerto Rico, and how this really is about community building there and supporting the community in a time where they need to create more resilience, or just understanding the complexity of our natural resource-based economies in many states. And so, you know, as I continue to have these conversations out there across the state, and we start bringing in more of our not our natural allies necessarily into this work, I think it gives me more and more hope about the future for this. The other thing I think has to do with the K through 12 system, and we work specifically with our environmental education funding within that program. And so many of the strategies that are being used in environmental education are really best practices in education. And so I think with the influx of STEM education, which is definitely integral to environmental education, talking more and more about getting kids out of their seats and out of the classroom, we have an opportunity now to really re-engage K through 12 education, and help provide those opportunities for that social emotional learning that we know is so important, grit, developing grit in kids, all of these different skills that we in environmental education are really uniquely qualified to help provide in that education system.
Absolutely. And it builds their leadership and advocacy. It really does. Alexandra, I'm going to go to you. We're running a little bit out of time, and I want to leave a few minutes for Judy to close us out here. But considering your circumstances, what are you seeing as the bright spots in the field, and certainly in and around Puerto Rico?
Well, actually, right now within the catastrophe, I think the bright spot, it can get even brighter, because these conversations that maybe were a little problematic before, environmental education in general was something basically ignored by most foundations here in Puerto Rico. It was a very small group of people that have been contributing to this.
Mhm.
And for the first time, you are seeing these conversations that we were not having before
Mhm.
in terms of solar energy, the conversations in terms of agroecological were being had, but again, on small scale, funders were not paying attention. So I think the bright spot is that now we have this attention for to change, at least on small scales. So solar, the grid is not going to change. You know, they're just going to patch it up, and it's going to basically be. I don't think it's going to change. I think it's going to change to be a disaster. But that's why the communities, for the first time, want to be not as vulnerable. They want to be resilient. So they're taking matters into their own hands. So the bright spot is that they're not waiting on the government. They're not waiting on somebody else to resolve the problem for them. They are taking matters into their own hands, and that's amazing. And environmental education is key to helping people take matters into their own hands.
Yeah, it really is. It's amazing that at such a critical time, an urgent time, you're seeing this kind of action. Well, you know, we're all thinking of you and hoping the best, and we'll be doing anything we can to support your efforts. I'm going to turn it over to Judy now so she can close out the session. But before I do, I just want to thank everyone. It's been a delight, and I've learned a lot, and I hope everybody on has as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Miss Judy.
Kara, thank you so much. And thanks to all the panelists for such great insights and sharing your story as funders. Our hearts go out to you, Alexandra, and just know that you have so many friends and supporters in the NAAEE community, in the global EE community, truly around the world, that are thinking about Puerto Rico and will be here for the long haul to try and help you.
Mm-hmm.
We also know how challenging it is for all funders to know what to fund and who gets the money, because there's so many wonderful programs and ideas, and it was great to hear some of your thinking about how do we create a culture of evaluation, how do we think about building social equity into everything we do, how do we better tell our stories, how do you actually get something funded, and how we can work better together, and as Jason said, and many of you, to change systems and think before disasters happen. We didn't get to everybody's questions, but we will try and answer a few on EE Central, on EE Pro, so be looking there for more answers. And I really want everybody to give this panelist of this panel a virtual thank you. So you're hearing claps from throughout the community. And I encourage everybody to tune in today at 3 o'clock. We have our EE 30 Under 30, Young Leaders Making a Difference. It will be live streamed, and you can go to our virtual conference page or on Facebook to hear these amazing young leaders. And every one of you talked about leadership for the future. So I encourage you to tune in because they are truly amazing. Thanks to all of you for taking the time to share your thinking. And thanks to everybody for joining. Take care.
Thanks, Judy. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.